Summary of Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. The story that follows is made up of the underground man's rambling notes, which are introduced by the author in a note. The author says that the underground man is representative of the current generation. The underground man starts by telling the reader that he is sick, mean, and ugly. He tells the doctors that he doesn't know what's wrong with him and won't let them treat him out of spite. 20 years ago, he lived underground. Before that, he worked for the government and was rude to everyone who came to his desk. Neither a scoundrel nor an honest man, neither a hero nor an insect, he tells his readers. He also says that in the 19th century, an intelligent person can't be a man of action or character. He says that he is not to blame for being a bad person, but that his overly acute consciousness keeps him from doing anything. Being too conscious is a disease, he says. He tells the reader that there are times when he wants someone to hit him in the face. He also says that if someone hit him, he would never be able to forgive them or get even with them. People who aren't very smart act without thinking to get back at someone, but someone with overly acute consciousness has too many doubts and questions to act. The basement man says that he is like a mouse that goes ignominiously back into its mouse hole. He says that men of action don't question the rules of physics and math, or nature because they think it's impossible to speak out against 2 times 2 makes 4. The basement man, on the other hand, hates facts like those. The underground man says that there is pleasure even in a toothache by saying that someone with a toothache enjoys making loud noises of pain that bother other people after a while. Being a nasty little man, a rogue is fun for him, and then he asks the reader, can a man possessing consciousness ever really respect himself? Moving on, the man in the basement says he can't say sorry. Since he was a child, he would sometimes cry and say sorry when he did something wrong. But then he would understand that everything he was saying was lies, lies, wicked lies. He says that often gets into trouble because he is bored, which is caused by his high level of awareness. He says that guys who do things are only stupid because they do them. They have a reason to act because they believe they have found a primary cause of something. But a smart person would question these reasons and be able to come up with more than one. That means he only does what he does out of spite. What the underground man says about people who think people do bad things because they don't know their true interest and that if people knew what was best for them, they would act in that way. That's not what the basement man says. He says that people sometimes want something harmful to himself. He takes a short detour to say that modern society has made people crueler by pointing to recent wars like the American Civil War and the Napoleonic Wars. He says that some people believe that as science progresses, people will become more sensible and society will get closer to being perfect like a crystal palace. His argument is that this way of life would be dull and that people would rather follow their own stupid will than reasoning or reason. There are times when people desire something opposed to one's own advantage just to show that they have free will. He says that people are just a stop in an organ pipe who follow the rules of nature if they don't have desire or free will. He claims that history is nonsensical and that this kind of insanity is the only way for people to be against the logic of 2 times 2 makes 4 and show that he's a man and not an organ stop. 2 times 2 makes 4 is no longer life, he says, adding that 2 times 2 makes 5 is better. To keep arguing against the idea that people only do what's best for themselves, the underground man says that pain can be fun and that men sometimes love suffering terribly. The utopian thought of the Crystal Castle, he says, is a hoax, and he would turn it down because he couldn't stick out his tongue there to be mean. He tells people who read his notes not to believe one word, not one little word of what he has written. He also says that he has no plans to print his notes and only writes to pass the time. It's snowing outside, which makes him think of a story. In the second part of the novella, he will tell a tale apropos of wet snow. The underground man's story takes place when he is 24 years old, living alone and still working for the government. He wants to be friends with some people at work sometimes, but he hates them other times and feels alone. He says that he is too romantic, and then he goes off on a tangent about romanticism. He says that romantics in France and Germany are too romantic and stupid, but romantics in Russia are still somewhat realistic. The underground man says he read a lot at home but sank into dark, subterranean, loathsome depravity because he was depressed and craved for contradictions and contrasts. He tells his readers that he's not trying to explain why he's bad, but then he changes his mind and says that he is. The underground man sees a man get kicked out of a bar for fighting one night. He goes into the bar because he wants to fight someone. He puts himself in the way of an officer on purpose, but the officer moves him out of the way without saying anything and doesn't even seem to notice him. The officer makes him think about daring him to a fight, but he knows that everyone will laugh at him for talking about old-fashioned ideas of honor in literary Russian. After going home, he starts seeing the cop around St. Petersburg a lot. He writes a letter to the officer but doesn't send it. He sees the officer a lot on a certain street and always moves out of the way of the officer when they are about to cross paths. He is going to walk right into the cop and not move to avoid getting hit out of anger. He gets money from his boss to buy clothes that make him look good for the meeting with the cop. He moves out of the way just in time to avoid running into him. He finally does what he planned and runs into the officer. The officer acts like he doesn't see the basement man at all, though. The man in the tunnel thinks the police officer was just acting not to see him, and he feels avenged for everything. But his happiness doesn't last long, and he turns to his dreams of all that was beautiful and sublime to escape his sadness. It seems like he's been having dreams for 3 months straight about being a hero, like a figure from a Lord Byron book, and everyone loves him. But after 3 months of these dreams, the man in the basement wants to plunge into society. He chooses to see Simonov, a classmate from years ago that he hasn't seen in a year. When he goes into Simonov's room, he sees 2 other old classmates there too. The basement man says that they treat him like some kind of normal housefly because no one seems to notice him. His old schoolmates are planning a dinner to say goodbye to a friend named Zverkov who is leaving St. Petersburg. The man in the basement remembers Zverkov from school and hates him because he is cocky and good-looking. He knows Simonov's guests because he hated both of them in school. He invites himself to the party for Zverkov, but they don't want him to. The underground man beats himself up for getting in the way of Simonov's party after he leaves his flat. Even though he doesn't have any money, he knows he has to go even though he doesn't want to. He talks about his school years, when he wasn't popular and was a lonely boy. He says that he didn't like his classmates and thought he was smarter than them. Sometimes he would try to make a friend, but all he did was use these possible friends to exercise unlimited power over someone else. The underground man plans the party for the next day. Even though he thinks it will be weird and that he won't be dressed properly, he chooses to go to show that Zverkov and his other old classmates don't scare him. There are no other people at the hotel where the party is being held when he gets there, and a waiter tells him that dinner won't start for another hour. The man in the subway has to wait around in shame while the waiter sets the table. When everyone finally shows up, Simonov says sorry for telling the basement man the wrong time for the party. Zverkov and Furfikin make fun of the man in the tunnel for having to wait so long by himself. The other people at the party talk to each other instead of talking to the underground man, which makes him feel completely crushed and humiliated. He gets more and more drunk and tries to join the talk, but everyone else sees how drunk he is and treats him like a bug. The man from the basement gets up and attacks Zverkov in his toast. Furfikin yells at the basement man that he deserves to be whacked in the face, and the man challenges Furfikin to a fight, which makes everyone laugh. After drinking more, the basement man walks back and forth and stomps his feet at the party. They don't pay any attention to him. Everyone leaves to go to a brothel, and as they leave, the man in the basement asks Zverkov to forgive him. He chooses to follow them to the brothel and begs Simonov to give him money to pay for a prostitute. He thinks that either he will become friends with his old schoolmates or he will hit Zverkov in the face. While taking a taxi to the brothel, the basement man decides that he has to hit Zverkov in the face to get his respect back. He gets there, though, and can't find Zverkov. During the night, he sleeps with a young prostitute named Liza. The next morning, he wakes up feeling misery and bile and seeking an outlet. He tells Liza about a prostitute whose body he saw being taken to a graveyard earlier that day. He then goes on to talk at length about how horrible it is to be a prostitute. He talks to Liza about families and marriage, and he tells her that married life is pure bliss and tells her she should leave the brothel. He tells Liza that she will lose her health, youth, beauty, and hope if she keeps working as a prostitute, and that no one will remember her when she is dead. The man below gives Liza his address when she cries. The basement man writes Semenov a message the next day to say sorry for what he did. He is afraid that Liza will come to his house and see how gross he really is. The underground man is glad that Liza doesn't show up for a few days. He talks about Apollon, his helper, who is haughty and doesn't do what he says. He tries to keep Apollon's pay one day and make him beg for it, but Apollon just stares at the basement man until he breaks down and tells Apollon to treat him with respect before he pays him. Liza shows up while they are fighting. He feels bad about himself in front of Liza, and he starts to cry. He tells her he doesn't feel sorry for her and asks her to leave him alone. He starts to cry uncontrollably when Liza hugs him. The underground man feels like he can't love or care for her anymore after he gets better, and he wants her to leave him alone in peace and quiet. When Liza is finally ready to leave, the man in the tunnel gives her some money just because. Liza turns down the money and leaves right away. After imagining how he could fall down before her, sob with remorse, kiss her feet, and beg her forgiveness, he starts to run after her but stops and lets her go. He goes on to say that he hasn't seen Liza since writing his notes and that he feels bad about it. He yells that all people are cut off from life and crippled. He says, "In my life I've only taken to an extreme what you haven't even dared to take halfway." This means that he is the truth about people. The man says he no longer wants to write. There is a note at the end of the tale that says the underground man wrote more notes, but this seems like a good place to end the story.
About the author. Fyodor Dostoevsky was born into a family of 8 children. His father, Mikhail, was a doctor in the military who later got a job with the government and became a nobleman. Dostoevsky was sick as a child but smart. He was sent to a military tech school that he hated. His father may have been killed by serfs on his own farm while he was there. He was a young man when his mother died of cancer. It was his job to be an engineer, but in his spare time he wrote and translated. He also showed signs of epilepsy, which made his work and home life very difficult. Dostoevsky was sent to Siberia for 5 years starting in 1849 because he was accused of releasing materials that were critical of the government. His experiences there influenced the exile of Raskolnikov in his book Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky started writing the books that made him famous in 1866. These included The Gambler, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Notes from Underground, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. He had been broke for years because of a gaming problem. In his later years, he became more and more known as a great talent, and today he is seen as one of the best writers of the 1800s. However, his health got worse and he died in 1881.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.